Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about something that's absolutely essential when it comes to achieving success in the Arabic language, yet it's often the most neglected skill: listening. There's always a lot of talk surrounding memorizing vocabulary, the significance or importance of grammar and morphology, as well as speaking. But if you're not intentionally training your ear consistently, then you're missing a very important part of the language learning process. So today I'm going to share with you guys why listening is the foundation of all of these other language skills, right? Reading, speaking, and writing. And I'm also going to share some tips on how we can do this more effectively, especially for those of us who don't live in Arabic-speaking countries. First and foremost, Allah Ta'ala tells us in the Quran, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٌ إِنَّ السَّمْعَ وَالْبَصَرَ وَالْفُؤَادَ كُلُّ أُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ عَنْهُ مَسْئُولًا. Do not follow that of which you have no knowledge of. Indeed, hearing, sight, and the heart, all of them will be called to account. Right? All of them will be questioned. And of course, what's apparent from this ayah is that the person of sound intellect who possesses these faculties, they'll be held accountable for how they were used. Were we listening to things with our ears that were not permissible to listen to? Were we watching things that it's not permissible for us to watch? Were there any actions that we made firm intentions and decisions on carrying out that were not permissible? But this ayah also alludes to the fact that there are two key means to acquiring knowledge, right? To learning. The first is sensory perception, right? Our hearing, sight, etc. And second, through observation, things like research, study, etc. And what Allah Ta'ala specifically highlights in this ayah is listening. Listening is the key to learning, right? And especially when it comes to learning languages. And of course, we're also heavily influenced by things that we see, right? Another key element of learning. And this kind of goes hand in hand with listening, right? We're seeing the actions that are taking place. We're seeing the facial expressions of people. We're seeing the gestures that people make, right? And Allah Ta'ala also mentions here al-fu'ad, right? Fu'ad, another word used for the heart in the Quran, right? Alluding to the intellect. And there are plenty of scientific studies that show the significant role that the heart plays in relationship to the brain, right? And other cognitive processes like thinking. And way back before I even knew the Arabic language, when I just really started like learning the deen and things like that, one of the books recommended to me by my teacher at that time was The Magnificent Orient. And I thought this book was amazing, right? And I don't have it with me because obviously I left a lot of my books back in Canada. And I'll put it up on the screen here for anyone who's interested in reading it. I think it's a great read. So think about it. How do babies first learn languages? They learn for months and months before they speak their first words, right? Mama, dada, cookie, right? And this is based on what they're hearing, right? What they're seeing, right? So even if they can't formulate a full sentence, a child has probably said to you at some point in time, especially for those of you who do have children, right? Cookie. And they point to a cupboard or something like cookie. You know that they want a cookie, for example. This is how children learn. The first thing babies are introduced to is not textbooks. These are words that they're hearing, right? They pick these things up. So it's the same for us as adults learning a new language. And there are studies that show that listening is the primary mode of linguistic development, and that it's the first receptive skill that appears within human beings. And this is something that I've experienced as an adult, right? When coming across the Arabic language, hearing the Fatiha, for example, hearing the Quran being recited, and picking up on these sounds. Before even learning the Arabic language in a formal setting, you're hearing the Quran being played, you're hearing the rhythm, you're hearing the intonation of how these words are being pronounced, how these phrases and sentences are being put together. And this has also been my experience, right, in Egypt. And to see how this plays out as an adult is actually pretty amazing. And I've spoke about it in a few different videos, but in Egypt, they speak their own dialect. And this is something that can be a shock and very difficult to pick up on, especially for fresh ears. And especially for someone who, like me, spent all of their time learning Fusha, learning classical Arabic. And for the record, I have absolutely no regrets. That's exactly how I would start again. And initially, of course, you're surrounded by everyone speaking this particular dialect. And there's almost like a shock in hearing this new language and all of these different sounds and how they pronounce words and in real time, right, from native speakers. And, you're immersed in an environment where these sounds are constantly around you, right? Whether you're at the grocery store, whether you're just walking, down the street, whether you're traveling, right? You're commuting by Uber or transit, whatever. And of course, Fusha is very distinct from spoken Arabic, particularly in the Egyptian dialect. A lot of words are not the same, or how they're used and how they're pronounced, they're not the same. And I've kind of touched on this a little bit in one of my previous videos as well. But basically, a lot of it was like, bro, I don't understand what you're saying, right? Obviously now I've developed an appreciation for it, but still, Fusha is my main focus and will always be my main focus. Let's say like there's a particular commute that you make every day, right? There's going to be specific words and phrases and things that people are even saying to you as you're traveling that are constantly being used. They're like staples in conversation and in this particular environment. So in that first week or two, it's really overwhelming. It's fast. People are speaking with different accents, different tones, different pronunciation even, right? Depending on where they're from in Egypt as well, right? People say things differently. So for that first week or two, you're trying to pick up on these sounds. And after some time, you're able to distinguish where a particular sentence or phrase starts or finishes, right? And then there are certain words or phrases that you can attach a meaning to based on the context that they're used in, right? It becomes very apparent just from constantly hearing this. And I've had like experiences of my own and still do, because I'm not like fluent in the Egyptian dialect, nor is that my aim to become fluent in the Egyptian dialect. But it's one of those things where it's like I would be immersed in particular environments for so long, so repetitively, like I said, in the example of being on a commute, that a lot of these words and phrases go from being sounds to like really sticking out. You're constantly hearing them now. After some time, it's like this word or this particular phrase sticks out so much in your mind. And it's one of those things where the meaning of that word or phrase may not be self-evident, but it stands out so much. You're constantly hearing it, but you haven't attached a meaning to it yet. And that might require some further investigation. You may need to ask someone, right? What does this word mean? Or you search it up in the dictionary yourself, right? Which is why having a certain foundation in the Arabic language really helps. But the point is, everyone has a particular style or accent or the way that they convey certain things. There are certain expressions that are used even in Fusha that you may hear from the people that you're interacting with on a day-to-day in Fusha, right? Like your teachers and peers. When we're talking about people from many different places, so, everyone has different accents, a different speed at which they say certain words or pronounce certain things. And I've said it before, coming from an environment where there's no real need to speak Arabic outside the context of studying certain books. And even then, like a lot of times, especially if you're back in like, North America, like I was, typically your teachers will have a certain grasp of the English language as well. And certain things can be explained to you using the English language or through an English medium. Here, that's not the case. Arabic is all around you, right? And especially, like I said, if you're in an environment where Fusha is constantly being spoken, there are listening exercises that are specific to the context of what you're learning, because obviously you need to be able to follow along and understand what exactly is being conveyed. Essentially, you're just like brought back to this state of like being an infant, like being a baby again. Because the language is more than just individual words. Oh, this word means this. Well, no, in another context, it can mean something completely different. How it's being expressed and tied together, in sentences, there are specific meanings being conveyed, a certain feeling that's being conveyed, a certain rhythm that's being used. And, like I said, it's about more than just individual words and vocabulary. What about cultural nuances? What about social cues? What about humor? What about emotion? What about all of these different elements that come with expressing yourself in a language and understanding what's being expressed to you? Also, just hearing native speakers, it's going to help you with your pronunciation, right? Naturally, your pronunciation is going to get better. Naturally, you're going to be able to understand, the rhythm of speech, for example, right? And this is what's going to remove that sort of unnatural or forced feeling in your speaking. But yes, this is also an extremely powerful way to help you build vocabulary and even solidify and internalize these grammatical concepts. Now, what makes learning the Arabic language, particularly listening to the Arabic language, something unique and challenging is the fact that Arabic is considered to have this bilingualism in the language, right? And full disclosure, I just learned that there's actually a term for this. There's actually a word for this called diglossia. And it's when there's two distinct forms of a single language. And in the case of the Arabic language, right, you have literary Arabic, right, which is more formal, right? It's the type of language that's used in books, classical Arabic in particular, right? So when we're looking at classical texts and reading through these texts, etc. And then there's spoken Arabic, right, which is obviously a lot less formal and it's the day-to-day language that people typically use when they're speaking with others in the streets, right? And like I've kind of alluded to already, they're not the same, right? There might not even be any grammar at all. There's plenty of people who speak incorrectly all the time, right? It's not as, it's not as formal, right? And this is why you can have plenty of people who are very fluent in reading, in literary Arabic, that aren't necessarily fluent in speaking, right? And vice versa. And there are plenty of native Arabs that I've spoken to, that I've met, that I know, even before coming to Egypt, that, they don't understand the Arabic of the Quran or classical Arabic in general, right? And even between dialects, right? There are plenty of people who don't necessarily understand the bulk or the majority of what people are saying when they're speaking the Egyptian dialect versus the Moroccan dialect, for example. I've seen that here, but I've also seen on YouTube, I can't remember the actual video, or I'd give credit to it, but there was this YouTube video that I was watching one day, and it was between these two women. One was Moroccan and one was Egyptian, and they were just speaking back and forth. Basically, they were trying to see if they would be able to understand each other, right? And so it just goes to show you there's so much nuance in the Arabic language, not only when it comes to speaking, but especially when it comes to literary Arabic, classical Arabic in particular. There's so many different disciplines and sub-disciplines and sciences that contribute to, grasping this amazing, nuanced, deep language holistically, right? With that being said, I know this is a debate among so many different people. Do I learn Fusha? And that's obviously classical Arabic. And then you have MSA as well, which is like a descendant of classical Arabic, right? So there are a lot of more modern words used. But for the most part, people who speak MSA, it's very easy to understand them, even if you're someone who's just particularly learned Quranic Arabic. But I know people, for example, who they grew up in Canada, but they're Egyptian. Maybe they want to come back to Egypt, for example, and connect with their culture, connect with their heritage, and learn the Egyptian dialect, right? Nothing wrong with that. Maybe there are certain people who are more geared toward getting into the media space, etc. I really do think it depends on, your aims. But I think as a basis, Fusha is the key to all other Arabic dialects as well. And this is coming from someone who, again, has spent all of his time learning classical Arabic, Fusha. And even now, still in Egypt, obviously, I appreciate the people that I've met, that have embraced me in their culture, right? So yes, I mean, in wanting to connect with all of these different people that I've met along the way throughout my journey here, and that I see on a day-to-day basis, who may not necessarily know Fusha that well. Yes, I kind of adapt in a sense to how they speak as well, and I appreciate that. But of course, my aim is very much centered on the Quran and classical literature that aids me in that goal. And then of course in Egypt, there are, a lot of different things that you got to do on a day-to-day basis that requires you to have at least a very basic working knowledge of, how Egyptians communicate and, say certain things and convey certain things. So really it just depends. But, when it comes to listening, you definitely want to stick to Fusha, especially if you don't have a really solid foundation and grasp of Nahu, Sarf, Balagha, and these types of things, and Fusha in general. I don't think that would be wise, because then you'll just end up mixing things. And this is something that my teachers have always encouraged, and even till this day it's encouraged, right? Listen to Fusha. So how do we train our ears and develop this receptive muscle, if we can call it that, effectively? Obviously, listening comprehension requires a lot of brain power and focus, right? And this is something that's developed over time. Initially, of course, right, we're obviously going to struggle with a lot of the things that we're hearing, especially if the person is speaking fast and we're used to reading Arabic or hearing it at a specific pace. It may even just be that you get very easily distracted by the surrounding environment, right? This is common. It's like working out and trying to build a particular muscle, right? Like you don't go to the gym for one day, do a few curls, and all of a sudden, you have a bodybuilder physique, and now you're just curling cars for fun or whatever, right? Like, it takes time. Also, listening effectively is not just about your knowledge of vocabulary, grammar, or sentence structure, etc., right? It's also about your mental stamina and the ability you have to focus your attention. So building this receptive quality, your level of focus, it's literally like working on a muscle, right? And there's two main ways that you can do this. Listening passively, right? Which is when you're just like playing something in the background while you're cooking or while you're washing dishes, whatever. Maybe you're cleaning your house, whatever it is that you're doing. And basically you have this Arabic audio playing in the background while you do these things. And you want to get your brain used to hearing these sounds. You want to get familiar with these sounds. And you want to get accustomed to the pace, right? Because this pace is obviously going to be typically a lot faster. And then there's active listening, right? And your attention and focus and commitment in this area is where you'll really make progress, because now you're focused on engaging with this content, right? And it's not necessarily easy to do this in a non-native Arab speaking country, but it's definitely possible. And what you want to do is you want to start with smaller forms of content that have context. And in this first listen, you don't want to worry too much about particular details. You don't want to have any subtitles on, whether they're in Arabic or English at this point. And in this listen, you just want to get a general feel for the flow of what's being said and just a general idea of what's being said and seeing what you can pick out, right? Now, your next listen is going to be a little more purposeful, right? Here's where you want to try to pick out specific words or pick out specific phrases. For me, in my opinion, it's always good to write things down, right? In as much as you can. And I've spoken about the importance of having a notebook as you're hearing things and writing things down in one of my previous videos where I talk about, how I learned Arabic in Toronto, and then obviously some of my experience in Egypt as well, right? So this is very, very, very crucial and a very huge help, right? Having a notebook, and that's something that you can implement in this second listen. Now, the third time around is where, you can use subtitles, and you want to use Arabic subtitles, trying to connect these words to what you're hearing, right? And this is where you want to be able to extract some of these words from the transcript or from, the subtitles, and either search them up in the dictionary or use some of these, search engine tools. Obviously, the dictionary is going to be a lot more accurate, and it kind of builds your ability to utilize the dictionary. And this is where you'll also find that there are plenty of words that you might actually already know, but you never heard them in that context, or you weren't able to pick up on them as easily because of the pace that you're not used to, or because of the pronunciation that you're not used to, right? So this is why listening is very, very important. It's very, very crucial. Next up, you want to listen and you want to repeat after a lot of these different words and phrases from this speaker, right? And it's important that they're a native speaker, right? Because this is what's going to help you with your pronunciation as well and make it more natural, right? This is also going to help you retain a lot of these words and phrases that you're hearing, right? By repeating them. And now when you're doing this, it's no longer just something where there's simply input, there's output as well, right? Another suggestion that I would make as you're listening, right? And this is after you've completed these different steps, is again, you want to have a notebook and try to summarize what you've heard. Initially, this can be done in English, right? But eventually, slowly, you want to try to transition into Arabic. Also, if it's a particular story, right, there's a storyline, then maybe in point form, try to put the order of events in this story from memory, not listening and pausing and then putting it down. Listen to it thoroughly again, after all of these different steps, and then write down the order of events. Now, what should you be listening to, right? And there were a few people in one of my last videos that were mentioning the difficulty in the font and script in some of these texts, and I just kind of tied it into this video because I planned on making it anyway. Obviously, like I mentioned before, you want to make sure that you're listening to Fusha, right? And this is hard for me to really tell you, listen to this and then listen to this. No, you want to diversify the types of things that you're listening to. And you also want to find things that you're interested in listening to. Just like I mentioned when it comes to reading texts, when it comes to reading books, you want to find books that you find interesting to read. And just like it's important to read multiple different books on the same subject matter, maybe even the same text, as like a commentary or something, it's also important to diversify what you're listening to as well. Because you may find that a particular style of speaking resonates with you more. It may be a little bit more clearer. The emotion, the feeling, the rhythm in what's being said might be a little bit more your speed. Get what I'm saying? Just like the style of writing of a particular author may resonate with you more. So it's one of those things where it's kind of difficult to say, especially when I'm speaking in general terms and I don't know the level of the person that I'm speaking to, or like, where exactly you're at. For those of you who would like a more tailored approach to your Arabic learning and different sets of exercises and resources, you can book one-on-one sessions with me as well, and the link is below. First and foremost is the Quran. This takes top priority above everything else. And this really helped me because around the time that I just started reading the Quran, I was in college at that time and I had like a pretty long commute and probably like an hour and a half both ways. There were some particular surahs, some that I remember distinctly was Surah Qaf, Surah Yasin, and Surah Ar-Rahman. And sometimes I would play these on repeat. I would listen back and forth both ways all the time. And naturally, a lot of these sounds and the style of recitation and even some of these words of the Quran, even though I didn't memorize the Quran, that wasn't even like my aim at that time, they became like ingrained in my psyche. Like, you know what I mean? And it's hard to kind of explain, but it's something very powerful listening, but particularly listening to the Quran. But of course, in addition to being a form of learning, right, the Quran is healing, right? So this is something very powerful in that, I remember distinctly during that time was life-changing for me. And then there are specific shows, like I mentioned in some of my past videos or one of my past videos, the Ahmed ibn Hanbal series, for example, which you can find on YouTube. That's a great series to watch. And one of my teachers, she would recommend a particular cartoon very early on in my Arabic learning journey, the Salahuddin al-Ayyubi cartoon. Obviously, this is in Arabic, and this is something that, you could even, if you have kids or whatever, you can kick back with your kids and watch this cartoon in Arabic. This is also good, something lighthearted as well. And this is also a great way to pick up on particular words and phrases. And a lot of Egyptians that I meet out here too, who do speak English, a lot of times when I ask them, like, how did you learn how to speak English? Most of them say through TV shows and movies and things like that. So this is also a great way. Audiobooks, right? If you can find audiobooks, particularly books in Fusha, for example. I know my library back home in Toronto, they even have like an app and you can get different audiobooks and even books that you can like have shipped from other libraries. And my particular library had the Kalila Wadimna audio series, and it's a book that's recommended to read, obviously in the realm of Arabic literature. And like I said, they had the audio version with the text as well. So maybe there are things like that you can find online. Maybe your local library, wherever you are, may have something of that sort. And also, guys, you know what I mean, when it comes to learning Arabic, when it comes to learning in general, don't be afraid to invest in yourselves. Don't be afraid to invest in your education. That's a big part of learning. Most people don't value what they get for free. That's just the reality. It's about investing in your education and investing in things that are for the betterment of yourself, whether that be books, whether that be particular courses, etc. Next up, also, there's plenty of different podcasts in the Arabic language. And this can just be something that you listen to passively. BBC, Al Jazeera has the news in Arabic and also podcasts in Arabic, things like that you can kind of watch / listen to in the background. And then of course, there's plenty of things that you can find online on YouTube, wherever, of people covering dini subjects like seerah, like hadith, etc. So there's so much out there. And of course, you want to make sure that you're listening to things in Fusha, right? But again, it's hard to pinpoint and say, listen to this, then that. It's more about kind of diversifying what you're listening to, but of course, kind of sticking to this general framework. But hopefully, inshallah, this is beneficial to you and helps you in your Arabic learning journey. I'll wrap this up by saying that the key is to find content and find things that are interesting to you. It doesn't have to be hours and hours on end that you're learning, right? Like I said in my earlier videos, keep it to 10, 15, maybe even 30 minutes a day, right? Cap yourself at a particular time, but show up, be consistent every day, right? And inshallah, you'll see results. And obviously, if you have access to real life interactions, this is going to trump everything else. But, I know most people are kind of in the same boat that I was in, right? In my learning journey, if you're in North America or a place similar to North America, I see some of you are tapped in from like Brazil and places like that. So I understand that can be difficult as well, but that will always trump the rest. Keep in mind that the natural progression of learning a new language, right? Receptive skills such as listening and reading, these skills typically pave the way for other productive skills like speaking and writing. Listening has and always will play a huge role in my learning journey, in my Arabic learning journey in particular. And it's had a huge positive impact on developing my other language skills as well. So hopefully in taking some of these steps and some of these advices, you guys can see some significant improvement too, inshallah. If you found this video beneficial, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deen-related content. And inshallah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.